Would you spend thousands to visit a place with no public roads and dark secrets? Because that's exactly what awaits you at Canada's Nahanni National Park.
From majestic landscapes to the Valley of Headless Men, we are diving into one of Canada's very first World Heritage Sites.
Get ready for wild history, even wilder rivers, and crucial travel tips. Let's explore together right after the intro.
Welcome to World Heritage Rookies, the podcast where we explore UNESCO World Heritage Sites one episode at a time. We are Lina
and Ralph, and we will travel alongside you to some of the most stunning sites our world has to offer.
Each week, we dive into the history, fun facts, and reasons why World Heritage Sites matter for humanity, sharing our own discoveries and travel tips along the way.
So, let's dive in and learn about some World Heritage together.
Welcome everybody to our 5th episode of World Heritage Rookies. If you are new here, we are really happy to have you.
And if you're joining us repeatedly from the other episodes, welcome back. We're happy that you're still sticking with us. And today you will have to deal a bit more with my voice for a longer period again because it's my episode. Are you looking forward, Lina, what I'm going to be talking about today?
I'm really looking forward. I know what is the place for sure, but to be honest, this one, I don't know much. So this is going to be a completely discovery journey for me.
I have to admit, for me, it was the same when I went into the research before and I was like, okay, what's this about? Frankly speaking, also when we sort of thought about the order of these episodes we wanted to make, I was also not aware that this is another World Heritage Site in Canada. So when you're listening, you probably read the title. So I hope it's not that big of a surprise for all of you. But I'm going to present today a bit of information about Nahanni National Park Reserve, which, as I mentioned, is another World Heritage Site located within Canada. And perhaps before we start, as usual, with some history and interesting backgrounds about the World Heritage Site, the usual question in advance, Lina, what do you know before the start of this episode about Nahanni National Park Reserve?
It is in Canada. Thank you.
Okay. I think that I can be happy about the fact that I can tell you a lot of things in this episode because there are actually surprisingly interesting and cool facts about Nahanni National Park Reserve that I was definitely not aware of in the beginning. So you're in for a thrill, I would say.
I will say I do have one assumption, and it is that it's a natural World Heritage Site.
That is also, sorry, spoilers ahead. Also, this is really correct, but there is a lot more to it. So it is located in the heart of the Northwest Territories in Canada, which are, I know that's a surprise, but in the northwest of Canada.
What?
Yeah, I know. And it is, generally speaking, considered one of the most stunning examples of like northern wilderness and a very beautiful landscape in Canada by itself. Okay, so let's start a little bit about the history and the indigenous roots. So generally speaking, the area where today Nahanni National Park Reserve is located is associated with the indigenous people, which are called the Dene. The name Dene means actually just the people in their actual own native language. And they were known for traditionally inhabiting the area, which is also today encompassing Nahanni National Park Reserve. This will be an important information to remember for later. And yes, you have a question, I see.
I do have a question. Are they still an indigenous community in the park?
Yes, they are. And this is actually one of the topics that is still discussed for today. So I can actually jump ahead of a bit of information I want to present later. That is the reason why it is called Nahanni National Park Reserve, because there are still some outstanding questions or non-solved questions about the ownership of the indigenous people regarding the whole area. And until today, there are still discussions going on. And that's the reason why the whole area is still called a national park reserve. But yes, so they are still linked until today with the area that we're talking about. And the Dene people, they are generally belonging or believed to belong to a very vast cultural linguistic family that is stretching from all the area of northern Canada and Alaska and really down until areas in the American Southwest. And actually, archaeological evidence that you have here in this northwestern territories is suggesting that you have human activity for up to 10,000 years in the past. And traditionally speaking, the Dene people, the indigenous people there, they lived a very nomadic lifestyle. So they were, as we know from a lot of the indigenous people before major settler movements came around, they were deeply connected to the land, relying on things like hunting, fishing, trapping, and overall foraging for their survival. And then, well, as it has been in many places, something changed in the 18th century, where you would have for the first time European traders arriving within the area, also altering the way of living for the Dene people around there. So you would suddenly start that trading posts and more bigger outlets or let's say permanent residents are being built up in the area, also affecting the areas that typically were inhabited by the nomadic tribes or families of the Dene people. And
I would assume as well, because you say 18th century, so
yes,
which means it's still already a little bit late that happened in other communities in the east of Canada, I imagine, and in the east of the United States, right?
It is probably late because we have to still think about it. It is very remote, the area we're talking about. So, of course, also the whole movements of European settlers around the North American continent, it will take a bit more time to reach the area that we're talking about here. So this is why they had, I would say, a longer period of time where they not yet were influenced by the lifestyle of European settlers. And that's definitely something that also comes into consideration. So all the information that I found so far about the Dene people was that they really were able to keep up the majority of their original lifestyle until their lifestyle was influenced by the European settlers.
I understand.
Yeah. And as you then can imagine, with all of these more permanent sort of villages, outposts or trading posts being established, more and more of the Dene family also had to sort of adjust their way of living. So they had to start settling near trading posts, abandoning their nomadic movements. There were still a percentage or a vast part of Dene who still remained sort of mobile, and they were then traveling around the area, and they were actually sort of famous for one thing, which was trading furs, as I learned. So they would then actually take the travel to all of those permanent trading outposts and offer all of the furs and pelts and animal skins that they hunted. And what I found as a very interesting information there, so one way they would do this, they would build so-called moose skin boats. Can you imagine what this would be like from the name moose skin boat? What would you think is this?
Moose skin boat. Well, I will assume the skin of the moose are kind of waterproof. So I guess that they cover the boots in this skin in order to prevent to the wood to get corrode and destroyed by the water.
Yeah, that's a very, very good guess. So you're absolutely right about this. What they would do is they would build these boats that were sometimes up to 20 meters long. And what they would do is they would put 6 to 10 raw moose hides, like you mentioned, that are waterproof, then stretch this out over a wooden frame and then use this actually to go downwards the Nahanni River, which we're going to talk about soon also, which is the namesake of the whole area. And these boats, they were so big that they could carry whole families and also other goods that they would sell. And interesting enough, because, well, the boat itself was made out of skin or moose skin that could trade, they would later disassemble the boat and sell also the moose skin that they used to make the boats, and then make their way back home on foot, for example.
It's like the first, one of the first times I hear that actually an indigenous community goes so far away from the profit and to survive in order to continue their way of living.
Yeah, and so this was especially a more familiar sight within the 19th century. So like I mentioned, after the arrival of the first European traders in the 18th century, you had more and more interaction via trading in the 19th century. There was still a bigger change in the 20th century because there was then oil and gold discovered. And as you can imagine, that also increased some interest in the overall area in northern Canada. So obviously you would have increased European settlement and economic exploitation around there. And that led to the fact that even more of the traditional Dene lifestyle around there about the nomadic way of living got more and more dismantled because more settlements popped up, more and more people arrived there, more and more explorers came around to look for to raw materials that had wealth towards them, like gold and oil. I think this is also important to mention because this is directly tying to what I mentioned just before, that until today it is still designated the whole area as a reserve because there are still decisions to be made about indigenous land claim settlements. And what I actually found as a very positive or good information on this matter is that until today, actually the whole reserve area is co-managed by, on the one hand, the Parks Canada that I already mentioned in the sources, but also by the Decho First Nations, which is an association that ensures the interest of indigenous people. And this co-management is supposed to ensure, well, that you have on the one hand, of course, the ecological preservation part of it ensured with the Parks Canada part, but also the indigenous heritage is considered. And so both of them are making decisions regarding the Nahanni National Park Reserve together to make sure that both sides of interest are actually considered.
So it works like a board kind of association when, like, if a decision has to be made over the park land, they have to sit together and get to an agreement.
I would assume so. I did not find like any kind of specific descriptions how it is done, but the sources that I checked out, they mentioned, it is at the moment really indeed a co-management because it is recognized the importance of this land or this whole area had towards the indigenous community within Canada. Yes, so this first about a bit of the historical background of the area that we're going to be talking about today. Before we come into more specifically the landscape and why it's a World Heritage Site, some fun facts and stories. You mentioned already before, like, how big is this area? So by today, the Nahanni National Park Reserve covers about a bit more than 30,000 square meters. That means actually that Nahanni National Park Reserve is larger than some countries like Belgium, Haiti, or Rwanda.
But how many little Liechtensteins fit in this park?
I have to admit, I do not know from heart the size of Liechtenstein, but I will make sure after we record this episode, I will find it out so we can perhaps post it on our Instagram, because just a very smooth way to bring in social media marketing. If you want to follow some supporting material or some other insights that we might have for each episode, you will find us in a sort of companion post that you can find on our Instagram at World Heritage Rookies. Smooth, right?
Yeah, really smooth. I will make sure that to put the map of the park and a little Liechtensteins.
Yeah, that is then your job. Yeah, but like I said, so it's a pretty huge area. Interesting enough, it was not always this big. So as far as my research showed, apparently the original area was more or less about 5,000 square meters, but it was then actually expanded by 6 times in the year 2009 to make sure that this whole reserve area is just covering more space. So this jump, interesting enough, occurred when it was already a World Heritage Site, because as we also we'll discuss, or as we see, it was inscribed in 1978, the same as Lanzo-Medo. So this whole expansion of the original area happened then really in 2009, and it increased massively of up to 30,000 square kilometers. So next to, I would say now more of the statistical facts about its size, there is a surprising amount of legends and sort of spooky stories related with Nahanni National Park, which I have to admit, when I was starting to research it, because can sometimes be sort of my guilty pleasure when there's like some legends and some myths and some folklore learn about some spooky things that might lurk in the area. There is a lot of this in Nahanni National Park. So, are you ready to learn about some spooky and scary stories?
What happens if I say no?
Then we will have to cut this episode short. Thank you so very much for listening, but I hope you're ready for it.
I am ready.
Okay.
Let's go.
So we're first going to start with, let's say, a bit more like local folklore and like legends. So I mentioned already before that the area is mostly associated today with the indigenous Dene people, but actually also oral histories from the Dene people describe the whole Nahanni Valley in the area as the homeland of the so-called Naha people. And they were, according to the legends, they were a really feared and warlike tribe that would cause a lot of trouble, for example, for the local Dene people. And Naha by itself means apparently in the indigenous language people from the Nahanni Valley. And they were said to be really famous for raiding nearby settlements, only to later vanish mysteriously, sometimes leaving only smoldering fires and empty camps, which gave them like sort of a supernatural aura, and like people were like discussing they might not be just pure humans, and this like where people would be very scared about them. They do not know really what happened about them, because interesting enough, also then there was a story that one time when the Dene people wanted to retribute towards the Naha people, that they found the same way that the Naha people left the villages or the camps that they raided, the same happened there. So when they arrived at one of the camp of the Naha, they didn't find anybody there. Only just, it was completely empty, just like some smoldering fires, some empty camps, and that was it. And they suddenly vanished without any trace from the records of the Nahanni Valley. And interesting enough, there's a theory that, as I read in some of my sources, is sort of disputed, where again, it's like, okay, just because something is correlated might not be necessarily connected, but apparently linguistic people have noticed some similarities between the language of the Dene people of this area and the Navajo language, which you will find in America, in the United States. And this has led to some theories that the vanished Naha, they might actually have migrated south from Canada and have become the ancestors of the Navajo Nation today in the United States.
That's really interesting. They have any other evidence apart of the language similarities?
It seems really just to be based on the language similarities, as far as I found out, because, well, the Naha, they are sort of like more of a myth associated with the area. There's apparently not that many records. So the majority of the sources that I could find, they talked about this just being like oral histories that are being passed on by the indigenous people. And this is, like I said, that's why it's disputed or sort of like discussed. But obviously that could be a possible explanation why they were, after a while, not found anymore within this region, and because they actually might have migrated south.
How interesting. So it was not the camp that disappeared, it was just they move out.
Potentially, yeah. So this is one theory. And this is like one of the sort of legends associated with the area. The other is a bit more...
spooky?
Spooky, bloody, however you want to call it. So that's also actually the reason why today you will sometimes find the area nicknamed as the Valley of Headless Men. And the reason for this is that since the early 1900s, if you remember what I told before, this has then been the time where sort of like the gold rush has happened there, and like because oil and gold has been discovered in the area. And since the early 1900s, the Nahanni region has been linked to some mysterious and tragic events surrounding, decapitations. So it's said that more than 40 explorers and treasure hunters and people looking for gold in the area have either disappeared in the area or they have been found dead, very often decapitated, so with their heads actually missing. And so far, it's assumed that at least 6 victims were discovered decapitated. Their remains only like found in some burned out or abandoned camps. And there's actually the most famous case associated with this is 2 men, actually 2 brothers from Scotland called Frank and Willie MacLeod. And they were prospecting for gold around the years 1904 to 1905. So the typical area, like I mentioned before, when there was sort of a bit of a gold rush happening around there. And they disappeared without any trace what happened. And actually, years later, an expedition was headed out. If I remember correctly, it was actually led by another brother of theirs who did not join in the original, but I think if I read correctly that he sort of led this expedition in to find out, okay, what the hell happened with my brothers? And they found their remains, so only their skeletons anymore, the heads missing.
Completely
gone, have apparently not been found since then. And it was found in an area which would later then become, Dead Man's Valley, near to this called Headless Creek. And until today, it's sort of a big mystery what has happened to them. And quickly after this has also been known, apparently rumors spread around. So for example, that they found something like a hidden El Dorado in the north, like a huge gold mine with vast amounts of gold. And until today, this is sort of a mystery being driven, the lost MacLeod mine. And some argue that this might have been the reason why they were killed. By who, nobody can say. Supernatural reasons or greedy other competitors. And ironically, this sort of lost MacLeod mine sparked another gold rush fever where they're like, okay, we want to find this El Dorado of the North. And apparently some of the people who were looking for it had the same fate. So they ended up dead with their heads missing.
Always in the same valley, right?
Yeah, in this whole area. So not always in the exactly same place, but overall in the same area. And there's like, I mean, after a few of these tests, like you sort of would, perhaps I should not look for this place, I would assume.
I just think that sometimes, I mean, everything that is gold, magic towns in the world, they're always tragedy. So don't try to find them. For some reason, they are hidden.
Or disappeared, yeah.
Or disappear.
And there have, of course, been a lot of different ideas or theories what might have caused this thing. So one thing what I mentioned before is some people, perhaps the Naha actually didn't disappear. Perhaps this warrior tribe is still around and trying to defend their area. This was one possible explanation. There are also some supernatural reasons believed there could be the place. So there is associated with the region a creature which is called the Wahila, which is often described as a sort of huge bear wolf-like animal, which is hunting in the region.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's also a regional story about people called the Naklak or Nukluk, not sure how you pronounce it, which are apparently like sort of described as small barbarian cave inhabitants that
dwarves.
Well, not necessarily dwarves, but actually cannibals. So it is believed that those were wild men or like half men, whatever, like not fully built men in a way that would then house in caves and go out to hunt and raid for corpses and then eat them.
But just the heads?
Not just the heads, just in general. And then also there is apparently the myth of something called, or like some beings called the Nakani, which apparently, as I understood correctly, translate into wild men, which are the contrary, supposed to be like terrifying, hairy giants that are supposed to kill and eat everybody who's intruding into their lands. And this is actually interesting because their presence is tied to actually a Dene word, which is understood is linked to the river, and which would then translate into river of giants.
How interesting.
Yeah. And all of these myths, they sort of earned the area nicknames like, the Valley of Headless Man, Dead Man Valley. And I'm curious, obviously we will not know the answer, but what do you think could have been the reasons for these disappearances and the headless corpses?
I don't know. I find interesting to think that maybe the Canadian Bigfoot or the Canadian Bigfoots are the reason. But of course, it could also be just inhabitants that were not interested to have any kind of mining in the area, or also other competitors that were looking for gold and needed a little bit of privacy. I mean, it could be greed, it could be some unnatural aspects, but I will assume that it's so actually other settlements or other inhabitants looking for gold.
Yeah, that's also, I think, if I remember correctly, it was on this blog that I mentioned before of the retired Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer.
Which I wanted to say it before, but you continue. That sounds like a really interesting life. So I will check it out.
I also thought, that's quite of a career, right? First, being part of the mounted police, then becoming now a crime author and apparently also a blogger talking about these areas. And I think it was on his blog that I found the conclusion. Yep, that might have been one of the likely explanations. So it could either have been indigenous people or other treasure hunters that were doing this, because what better way to scare off further people coming into the area than leaving this kind of really disturbing message. And well, yeah, finding a headless corpse, I assume, will tell the story for a lot of people. Perhaps, I should not go there.
Yeah, no, for sure. And also, he sounds like an amazing grandpa.
Can guess he can have a lot of stories to tell. So yes, these were some of the historical facts, and apart from that, fun facts and stories about the Nahanni National Park Reserve. Now coming to the reason, why is it a World Heritage Site? The question that's coming as usual. How many criteria do you think it matches?
Well, I know Natural had 4 maximum, so I will say between 1 and 2.
That's correct. It matches 2. So the first one that it matches is criteria number 7, which is the outstanding natural beauty. So generally speaking, the whole Nahanni region is until today celebrated as one of North America's most breathtaking wild river landscapes. So what is the interesting about the whole area is that the scenery, it combines really a lot of breathtaking experiences, like towering canyons. You have waterfalls that are absolutely breathtaking. You have karst and river formations. You have a wonderful river area that is diving through the mountain landscape around there. And this gives the whole area a feeling of untouched wilderness and uniqueness that is very special to the region. And what are some of the natural highlights that you would find there? So first, the namesake of the valley is the South Nahanni River, which, if I pronounce it correctly, is in the natural or the indigenous tongue of the area, also called Naha Dehe, if I pronounce it correctly, I hope. So this river is generally considered the heart of the park, and until today is a very, very popular destination for wild water rafting. And it originates in the Mackenzie Mountains area and is carving through the whole area that we have in this place through the landscape, and is then really giving to some of those spectacular canyons and other formations giving part. So this is the main natural part of this whole area.
It had to be beautiful.
Yes, but apparently also quite dangerous from what I learned. So there are areas there for the wild water rafting that are considered quite dangerous and like only for very experienced rafters. So it has apparently really some pretty dangerous areas also to it.
So it's not rafting for everybody.
It's not rafting for everybody, as I understood, no. So you have to definitely know what you're doing. Then another highlight is probably also one of the park's most iconic landmarks, which is called the Virginia Falls, which are dropping to a height of 92 meters down, which is nearly twice the height of the Niagara Falls, which I assume are a bit more popular or well known. But they are also one of the most stunning, natural beauties that you will find in this park. And apart from that, you have deep and wonderful canyons. So like I mentioned before, the river, it slices through this whole rocky terrain there. And sometimes there are canyons that are actually going up to 1,000 meters deep. And this is then really still coming and also showing some remains of all the natural events that have been going there since the last ice age's glaciation, and really unique landscapes that you find there through canyons, and which I took some look at the pictures. So I hope we can also find some of them perhaps for our Instagram. It really seems like it's from another world.
So it's a place to visit, especially for adventurers that likes nature and hiking and maybe some extreme sports as well.
Definitely. So I will tell a bit more about this in the later part about the travel tips. Apart from that, the waterfall, the river, and the canyons, we also have, like I mentioned before, some karst formations made out of this natural stone that really create really fascinating limestone landscapes that are full with like sinkholes, little ridges, and like hidden passageways. You have also different cave systems around there that apparently, as I heard, can also be really beautiful, like shimmering when it gets colder with ice crystals, have some really breathtaking formations of stalactites and stalagmites, which I always forget which are the ones going up and which are the ones going down. And last but not least, the area is also famous for its hot springs and tufa mounts, so like made out of volcanic rock. The area has around soft rock. It has about 250 geothermal vents that are feeding the whole region's mineral water areas. And the so-called rabbit kettle hot springs are actually Canada's largest tufa mounds, which are built by all of these mineral-rich flows that you will have coming in from all the hot springs around.
There is any kind of like spa-driven activities that you can also do?
What I found there is not really like typical spa-driven because it's a really remote area. So you will have tours that apparently bring you around there, and I did not 100% see if you can bathe in them or go in them. I would assume to, but you will not find like a typical 5-star resort around it because it's a really remote area.
I see.
And yes, this is also sort of playing into the second criteria it matches, which is criteria number 8, Earth's geological story in motion. So the whole area is a living showcase of active geological processes, which makes it a natural laboratory in a way to understand some of the forces that shape our planet. Like I mentioned before, you have this part, erosion by a body of water, which is sculpting the deep canyons. You will have the mountain ranges by itself, which are the influence of tectonic uplifts and folding, all of these huge mountain ranges that you have around there. The influence of wind over the karst formations and the erosion it has with it. And lastly, then also this formation of the karst and similar landforms from the different sinkholes to vast underground chambers is really just a very interesting combination for geological research. And these are the 2 criteria that it meets.
I guess that it also helps that it's so remote and untouched to do a lot of research and geological analysis in the area.
Yeah, and this is actually a very, very smooth transition to the last part of this episode, which is the travel tips, which starts with the fact it is really, really, really remote. So it's generally considered as one of Canada's most remote park areas. There seem to be no public roads that are leading into the park, so you cannot drive there. The way you can get there is either you can charter a so-called float plane, which will go from various places there. Apparently, the most common used is a place called Fort Simpson, which is also home to the main park office. You can apparently also, when you're experienced, enter the area by canoe or kayak, or theoretically hike into there. But obviously, because it's so super remote, this is something that you need experience for. And as a result, the whole tourism there is like really limited. So I found various sources that state like that you have only a few hundred, or perhaps in the low number of 1,000 visitors in Nahanni each year. So the reason for this is not, of course, the remoteness, but it's very expensive to get in there if you are not able to, do it by yourself, which you should be only when you're really experienced and know what you're doing. And that brings us actually to some other topics that are to consider. So first, you can mostly only travel there during the period of early June to late September. The peak conditions apparently to kayak or to make river boating on the river are typically late June to early September, because remember, we're talking here about Canada, really north of Canada. So in the winter, it gets really winter, I can assume. And then you, in any way that's sort of challenging or dangerous area, can become even more challenging. And if you want to stay there overnight, you need to make a reservation first, in order to make sure that, the very unique and fragile environment is protected, but also for safety reasons, obviously, so that you can register when you want to go in and deregister when you're going out, to make sure that, everybody who goes in also is taking account of into it, typically. And the typical experience what you have there is what I found. I did some research about potential trips that you could take there. Obviously, not comparing a lot of different providers, but to get just like a rough feeling of what is done. So I found generally like two main roads of main ways of experience. So first, river expeditions. So you would have multi-day tours that would go either by canoe, kayak, or raft, that will bring you to some of the major landmarks, like for example going down the river towards the Virginia Falls, and go through the canyons that make this whole park so unique. The typical costs of those are, as I understood, about 10,000 Canadian dollars, which translates to roughly 7,100 US dollars for a 10 to 14 day group expedition. And if I read it correctly, that's the price per person.
Okay, it's quite pricey.
Yeah, but you have to understand
it's a unique place.
Yeah, it's a unique place, but also it is, you need to be able to survive for a while. So you need to bring everything with you, like your camping equipment, obviously your canoeing or boating equipment, all of the food, all of the water. So obviously you have to come prepared, and you need, I assume, a really specialized guide who knows what they are doing. If you're not up for that, or if you say, okay, this is nothing for me, the most typical thing is like flight seeing tours then via a float plane, which is ideal for shorter visits. So you will often then go on a scenic flight that goes with you through all the highlights, also the canyons, the waterfall, some glacier lakes. This seems to be, as I understood, like if you're renting out one of those float plane, which is typically for 3 to 4 passengers, that will cost you about 2,300 Canadian dollars, or about 1,600 US dollars for the whole plane, as I understood.
For a day, I would say.
For a day, yeah. So this is really just a day trip, which allows you to see more in a shorter period of time, and obviously just in quotation marks from above, even though I heard that they will actually be able to land on some of the highlights and like just let you quickly go out there, because it's a really small plane. But obviously still you will mostly see the area there from the air. And lastly, if you are up for it, you can go there as a climber. So you can make some mountaineering and alpine adventures. So you can go there by your own, but obviously just when you have the experience and when you're really, really able to deal with this extreme kind of nature.
Does parts of Canada have any level of limitations of how they will assure that you have the experience to go by yourself?
That's a very good question that I honestly cannot answer. I assume that when you have to register and deregister, you might have to provide also the information how you're entering. But I assume that, I hope people who are going there are making sure that they have the respective level of experience. But yeah, in the end, you can never be 100% sure. And yes, so I think the last things to mention, also just about some fun facts, what makes it even more challenging. So the whole area there is grizzly and wolf territory. So also this means, you have to follow strict bear safety protocols and be prepared for any kind of wildlife, sort of connection. So be aware of this. Also, you're not allowed to bring any kind of drones into the park to ensure that the nature is not being harmed in any way. I read actually that if you're bringing it and you're caught, that can cost you up to 25,000 Canadian dollars. So they're really, really ensuring this. Yeah, just don't. And speaking from all of this, if we would not have to worry about money, would you prefer to go for it with a day trip via an airplane, or would you actually prefer to go to a 1 or 2 week kayak or river tour actually?
Well, knowing you, Ralph, and that you don't even kayak, it will be really hard to take the 10-day adventure. So I will say for us, just because for our audience, my husband is a little princess sometimes, and he wants to travel well.
I will not be able to say no to this because it's true. But actually, like, if you wouldn't have to worry about me, your little husband, princess, if it were just about you, what would Lena do? Would she prefer to have an airplane, or would she go on a 1 or 2 week kayak tour?
Well, I do not mind to be in the 1 or 2 week tour, I will say. Nevertheless, I do have to admit that the plane around the park also sounds nice. Maybe the only thing that I will regret is only 1 day. So if it's possible to actually, as you say, if money is not the restriction, I will maybe try to go several days and maybe try to explore a little bit more. But otherwise, I will take the 2 weeks trip.
Yeah.
And you?
I know my own limitations. I know 2 weeks in the nature would probably kill me. Doesn't matter how experienced the guide is. But apart from that, I honestly have to say, just from my own experience, what I had, like the few experience about flight tours, about some stunning sites in the world, I really, really enjoyed them because they offer you such a unique perspective. So one of my best experiences I was lucky enough to have in my life was a flight over the Nazca lines. And this was, by far one of the most stunning experiences that I have ever had, because the perspective is just so unique. Obviously, the Nazca lines is something also specific to watch from air, but I can imagine that flying over Nahanni National Park and then see like really just the whole vastness of the wilderness and around there, it sounds amazing. So for me, the flight, because I think I would enjoy the experience more, and also because I know I would not be up for the wilderness by itself.
So just for everybody to know, once I propose Ralph to go in a tent and go, we live in Germany, and here hiking and camping is something that pretty much all the population does. And he was like, no, thank you.
Yeah, I'm bringing shame to any of my ancestors who was really into hiking, but no, not my favorite activity, I will admit. Shame on me. So yes, that's, I think, the surprising amount of fascinating facts also for me I found about Nahanni National Park Reserve. And
I like that it's so remote.
Yeah.
Though, because the people that goes there, and we want to hear about, if any of you had already visited, that would be super nice to hear your experience at World Heritage Rookies. Maybe it's like, if it's worth it. And I think that it had to be, because you don't do that travel of trip if you don't know, if you are unsure that you're going to have an amazing experience.
Yes, I think also it's probably a really, really amazing experience. One you need to have really some dedication to. I'm not sure if we will ever be able to come there because it's that remote. But from what I heard from the people that were there, it was a really fascinating trip. But yeah, so I'm happy that you seem to have liked it. I hope that also all of our listeners enjoyed it and could learn perhaps something new. Next week, it's again your turn. Do you want to give like already a little information or tease what you're going to talk about?
Well, I can say we are going to jump back to Europe. And this one is actually the first World Heritage Site that I visit by my own, and Ral had not visited. So it's going to be quite interesting for him, I'm pretty sure, and for every one of you. So please tune in and looking forward.
Thank you very much, everybody, and see you the next time.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.